G'day, I'm Dr. Kev, and if we were going racing, the choice of tyres and the understanding of those tyres could be the most important thing about our car. But because we're building a road-going sports car, I just don't think it is. So in this video, we're going to unpack how I chose the tyres for Project 171. Welcome to Car Design Workshop. Now when it comes to the design of a car, especially as we focus on the suspension and handling of a vehicle, it can almost be blasphemous to say that the tyres are not the most important part on a car. But we've got to face the fact that the decision of what tyre we start out with a car is not necessarily going to be the tyre that we end up with on the car. Tyres are consumables. And what that means when we're designing and making a decision about which tyres is we don't have to feel as much pressure about that decision as we would if we were going racing. And that's good news because we can't get a hold of a whole heap of information that we're going to need in order to make a really good informed decision about the tyres we're going to run. We would want to know, how does the friction of the tyre vary under different conditions? We want to know, how do they wear? We want to know, how do they work in different weather conditions? We want to know things like road noise, as well as aspects like the compliance. How stiff is it laterally, longitudinally, and if we're twisting it? There are some things that we want to know that is pretty easy to get an answer for, and that's things like the weight of the tyre and the cost of the tyre. But for most of the others, we don't have a lot of good information. If we wanted to make an ideal decision, we would want a lot of tyre testing data. You see, a tyre's grip is going to be dependent on the slip angle, slip ratio, the temperature, pressure, load, the camber that we're running on the tyre. And we would want some of this test data for every tyre we're considering. We would also want to know things like the self-aligning moment of the tyre, so we can design our steering geometry. Things like the overturning moment, so that we could better determine what the loads are going into the wishbones and hence the load that's going into the chassis. We would want to know stiffness of the tyre, so we'd want test results of vertical stiffness, lateral stiffness, torsional stiffness. And we'd want to have a good idea of the lag of a tyre. So how long does it take a tyre to generate its full grip once you've applied a new set of conditions to it? Now, if you don't know a lot of those terms and you're not overly comfortable with understanding what's going on there, you're not at too much of a disadvantage, because you know what? The tyre companies do not provide this. It's very difficult to get a hand on this sort of information unless you've got access to the testing data yourself. And tyre testing of numerous tyres is well outside the budget of this project, and anyone building a custom vehicle at home is really not going to have access to that data in order to design their suspension and choose their tyres. Now, I don't want to be cynical, but it's pretty obvious that if all of the companies gave really accurate data about what their tyres were, then there would be fewer choices that people would make. If you're looking for out and out friction, you would just choose the tyre that has the best friction. So instead, we get less data, less valuable data, less depth in our data, and a lot more marketing. Now, if we don't have that data, a really good substitute would be experience. If we had run all of these different tyres on cars before, then we would know, how does a particular tyre feel in a car? And if we're looking for out and out performance, which we're not on this project, we would also know the times that we would get, lap times that we would get. But I haven't built this car yet, and I don't have a huge amount of experience with testing and tuning these sorts of tyres on cars of this sort of size and this sort of power. So I don't even have that experience to draw from. So just like we are with a lot of design decisions and engineering decisions, we're stuck not having perfect information. But we still have to make a decision. So before making a decision, it's handy to think about the particular goals that we want from these tyres. And straight up, we're not building a racing car. And that means we don't need the best performance possible. We just want reasonable grip. In fact, I think I might have even chosen a tyre that might have too much grip for what we want. Another thing to consider is that this is going to be an open top car, and I live in Perth. Perth doesn't have a lot of rain. Most of the time we have fine weather. And with an open top, I'm not going to be rushing out to drive this car in the rain very often. So I don't really need a tyre that has great wet weather capability. Just enough that if I am in those circumstances, I'm not going to get thrown off the road immediately. And because this is a car that I want to drive around in the state and maybe do some long distances with it, I've got to face the fact that I'm not going to be driving on perfect roads. Some Australian roads are not the best. We've got some really good roads into the city, but once you start to go outside of the cities, the quality of the roads can vary quite a lot. So that means I'm going to want a tyre with a reasonable amount of compliance. I'm not going to be aiming for something with really, really small and stiff sidewalls on it. I'm going to want a little bit of flexibility there, which may make the handling of the car a little bit lazier, but will make it suitable for more conditions. Now, one of the things I'm not that worried about is wear. This car is predicted to come in at around 600 kilograms. That means it's almost impossible to buy a tyre that is going to really have a problems wearing on a normal road. In fact, the people I know that have cars of that sort of weight, they generally say that you're throwing the tyres out not because they're worn, just because they've got too hard over time. And a couple of problems that we're facing is that this car is very, very light. Most tyres are designed for much heavier cars, and that means matching the right tyre to this car is going to be a little bit more difficult, and there's going to be less tyres available that are going to be suitable for that load and that circumstance. We also have a car that's got quite a lot of weight towards the rear, expecting anywhere up to about 60% of the weight of the rear of the car, which is going to mean maybe it's not going to be possible to run tyres that are similar in size. So we've got a reasonable idea of what we want from the tyres, and we've got a good idea of the information that we don't have access to. It's worthwhile thinking of the information that we do have access to. We do have access to some of the marketing information. Now, we've got to be so careful when we're going through marketing and trying to go through and figure out what are reasonable messages and what are, fabrications. Now, to jump ahead, I've chosen to put Toyo R888Rs on the car. Now, the marketing material for these tyres indicate that this is a road legal track tyre. Now, that marketing message doesn't give us much in the way of figures or ideal friction or anything like that, but it at least tells us that this is aimed towards cars that are likely to be similar to the sort of car we're building for Project 171. Something that will be suitable to go on the track but spend its life on the road. So at least it's the right market segment. If instead the tyre had said something like a high efficient tyre suitable for EVs, that instead would be a tyre that doesn't focus on grip, it would be a tyre focused on low noise and low rolling resistance, which aren't really concerns for this particular car. But there are serious limits to what we can learn from the marketing spiels. For instance, the marketing says that these tyres don't even flinch under hard driving conditions with 1400 horsepower applied. Now, I would probably be inclined to believe that because I haven't actually ever seen a tyre flinch before. But maybe in the future age of AI, that might be possible. But so many of these marketing claims aren't testable. And as an engineer who's familiar with the spectrum, I tend to take things literally and I like to test them. For example, the technical manager for Toyo, in a press release, said that these tyres will make the stopwatch sing. Now, I think I might be able to put this to a test. You see, I've actually got a stopwatch on my phone, and so I can go ahead and time these tyres and see if it does actually make them sing. Let's have a little bit of a listen.
These tyres are really fast, you should put them on your car.
Wow, I'm impressed. Not by the stopwatch's singing, which was probably out of tune, and even more damning for a stopwatch, out of time. I'm impressed because it seems this marketing is more than just the usual exaggeration. I might have made a good choice with these tyres after all. But we do have some information that is required for tyre companies to provide. And a lot of that comes to the designation of the tyre and particular tests that are required from authority bodies. Now, when it comes to experience, I've already mentioned that I don't have a lot of experience with the tyres that I'm going to be putting on this car. But there are people that have run different tyres, and they tend to accumulate in things like online forums. Now, you've obviously got to be really, really careful here. There's a lot of really knowledgeable people on these forums that have run different tyres on their cars. Some cars are going to be very similar to the size and power of the car that we're going to be producing. Other posts are maybe less knowledgeable. So this is going to be a bit of reader beware. And I think a more reliable source of information is around the people that you know. And a really good source would be things like car clubs. Now, I happen to be a member of the WA Sports Car Builders Club. The amount of information held within that club room is phenomenal. These are people that have built these sorts of cars before. Most of the cars are Lotus 7 style vehicles or Clubmans, which happen to have the same sort of weight that we're looking for Project 171. So when I'm going along to the meetings there, I've usually got a list of questions to get through. And even just seeing what people are running on their cars and getting their feedback is really valuable. So I'm not going into this tyre choice completely blind. I am leaning on the experience of other people. Now, the really good news here is that tyres are replaceable. I don't have to pick the perfect tyre off the bat. It's just not that important. I need to make sure that the wheel size and so on that I've chosen is going to give me a few options to test, but I am going to be able to go out and do some testing once the car is starting to come together, even before I go to do the final registration of the car. Now, prior to registration, most of that testing is probably going to happen at a racetrack or a closed circuit, and that's where I will be able to get driver feedback, or me feedback, because I'm going to be the one hooking it around. I'll be able to look at the results from the stopwatch. So even though I'm not that concerned about building the fastest car possible, I don't want to build a slow car either. I'll be able to look at the tyre after runs and get an idea for how it's wearing. That'll give me some insight into some of the suspension settings on the car. Am I running too much camber? It'll give me insight into whether I'm running too little or too much pressure on the tyre. It'll give me insight as to the toe settings on the car. If I go a little bit further, I can have sensors running on the car, things like steering position sensors, which give you an idea of how much you're working the front end, but I can also put tyre temp sensors on, linear pots to give an idea of the deflections in the spring and where the kinematics is going to be for a given suspension system. I can also look at putting maybe some strain gauges on the dampers to get some direct measurement of loads that will be going into the tyres. And if I get super adventurous, I might use a slip angle sensor. Well, that's a little bit out of reach, isn't it? A slip angle sensor, they can cost tens of thousands of dollars. But if you happen to know where one might be sitting around that could be borrowed, like I do, might be an option come testing time. So the main thing is not to pick the perfect tyre for the car, it's just to pick a family of tyres where there's a few different options. So I really need a short list of tyres that I'm going to run, because as you do lots and lots of tyre testing, that cost can build up quite dramatically. I hope I get it right out of the box, but I don't expect to be. Most race cars don't work great out of the box, so testing's always going to be a part of the design process. The other thing that I'll need to do is make sure that there's decent adjustment in the suspension system, especially when it comes to things like toe, which you'd want adjustment for anyway, reasonable amount of camber adjustment, and of course we can adjust the pressure on the tyres as well. Springs and anti-roll bars will going to be the main things that we can work with, and for the transit maneuvers, a lot of damper tuning as well. So developing the tyres on the car is more than just the tyre choice, and a lot of it, because we don't have that data at the beginning, we're going to have to do a lot of that in a testing regime. So I did mention that I've chosen the Toyo R888Rs, and it's worthwhile thinking, why did I choose this tyre? Well, First, even though this is a road going car, I thought the first set of tyres I put on the car should have high levels of grip. That means when I go testing, it's going to give me a little bit more margin before I run out of grip. Now, I'm not sure whether I'm going to want a set of tyres this grippy on a car that I want to be fairly engaging to drive. I think there is an argument to be made for sports cars that you can actually have too much grip and that you need to do silly speeds in order to find the limits of that grip. And I'm not really interested in having a car that's purely track bred. But for initial testing, I do want that margin of error. So how do I know that this is a tyre that's going to have reasonable grip? Well, there's really two useful bits of information that are required on the specification of these tyres. First, the tyres have a traction grading. So this could be AA, which is the best traction grading, A, B or C. And these are graded at AA. These are determined using particular tests. Now, what makes a grade AA is pretty low G-forces. So there's a lot of tyres that could come in that region, but at least if it's an AA, it's a highish grip tyre. The other number that we have is a tread wear number. Now, we would think that tread wear is really just about how the tyre wears. So the idea there is the higher the tread wear number, it means the tyre will wear out slower. So the tyres will last longer. Now, I'm going to use that as a proxy for rubber softness. The softer the rubber is, it will likely have a lower tread wear. The softer the rubber is, it will likely have a higher grip. Now, given that tyre wear is not something I'm going to be worried about, one, because the car is going to be really quite lightweight. Second, because it's not going to be driven huge number of Ks in a year. And finally, because if the cost of having a little bit of fun is that we need to change the tyres every so often, that doesn't really worry me. So I'm looking for pretty much the lowest tread wear I can get. Now, the lowest tread wear tyres I could find for on road were about 80. These Toyos come in at 100, which is pretty good. So I got some indication that this is going to be a fairly high grip tyre. Now, going along with that, I do intend to put this car on the track every so often. So I want it to have a fairly good temperature rating, or something that is going to be handled reasonably well as the temperature increases. And similarly, tyres are given temperature grades, so A, B and C, A being the best. When it comes to temperature grade, this is a grade A tyre. So that means as we get it out onto the track, there's a reasonable chance we're going to be able to run at different temperatures and elevated temperatures without too much of a loss of grip or a loss of handling in our vehicle. Now, one of the things that's probably the most important to consider is what sort of size that we're going to run on the tyres. And that's really going to link to what is our wheel size. And in an odd way, I think our wheel size, or the decision about our wheel size, is far more important than the decision of the tyre size. And this is because we are going to be able to replace tyres, but the size of the wheels are going to determine a lot of things. It's going to determine our packaging of our suspension system and brakes and things like that. It's also going to have a big impact on our bodywork. So if we want our bodywork well fitted to the wheels, we need to decide those sizes pretty early on. We can change tyre types, but there's going to be pretty big limits on what we can do with wheel sizes. Now, the whole idea of Project 171 is to build a car that harkens back to the 1950s, something that will give us the same sort of feeling, the same sort of approach as something like a Porsche 550 or an Austin Healey 104. So if you look back in the earlier videos, we show, I guess, some cars that we used as benchmarks for this project. But this car is going to have more power than the cars in the 1950s and those sorts of sports cars. And I'm not that interested in running the tyres similar to the tyres back then, even if you could get tyres of the right size in reasonable compounds. While I want a car that's inspired by the 1950s, I don't want the performance and handling of the 1950s. Now, if we look at that Porsche 550 and the Austin Healey, what we see is wheels that are reasonable diameters. So we're talking 15, 16 inch wheel diameters, but we are seeing tyres that are very narrow and have really big sidewalls on them. Some of that is because of the conditions of the day. So roads have got better since the 1950s. And if you want a car to handle reasonably well over bumps and disturbances in the road, a good amount of height in your sidewall is well worth it. Cars that are really designed for the track, they can have stiff sidewalls and they can have a lot of response in their tyres. But if we look at something suitable for, say, off-road, you're going to end up with tyres that are really, really large, big sidewalls. And if we want something in between there, we'd expect our sidewalls are going to be a little bit in between there. Now the sidewalls for those 50s cars, we just can't really achieve that in the tyres that are available today. So that's going to have an impact, or a flow-on impact, to the visual appearance of the car that we're designing. But I do want a tyre that's got pretty decent sidewall on it. So I was looking for something that wasn't just a bit of rubber painted onto a rim. Now when it comes to the actual wheel size, I didn't want something that was too big. If we look at the Enkei RPF1s, which are the wheel I've chosen, we can see that there's a whole heap of these wheels at different sizes, and we see a really, really strong relationship between the weight of the wheel and the outer diameter of the wheel. As we increase the diameter of the wheel, we're going to get a big increase in the weight. And lightweight is one of the absolute fundamentals we're trying to achieve with this car. Now, because this car is going to be fairly lightweight, could probably even package the brakes that we're going to need into a 13-inch wheel. That'd be about the minimum that I think I could package what we're going to need into this car. But there's a problem with that, is when we look at tyre availability, there's some really good competition tyres available and track tyres available at 13-inch size, but there's not a lot of really good road going tyres or high performance road car tyres at a 13-inch rim size. Now if we look at the 14-inch, if we go up one more step, then we see very few tyres available there. And 14 inches, that was a common tyre size for, say, an MX-5, and a lot of people that have cars that are 14-inch rims will increase it by one more inch to a 15, and then you have a much larger tyre availability. Using the Toyo R888Rs as an example, there's only 3 options available for a 13-inch tyre or 13-inch rim, and there's only 1 option available for a 14-inch rim. And then once we get to the 15s, there's actually a half a dozen, and realistically, probably all the sizes we're going to need. So that means we could probably expect into a reasonable time into the future that we will have tyre availability, decent tyres, different options for any wheel size that's 15-inch and larger. And that does tend to be a very, very common size for very lightweight cars, so things like Caterhams and so on. A lot of people, if they're mainly using them on the road, 15 inches tends to be about the right sort of rim size. Looking at the availability of options when we're doing engineering style work is really important. Even though something might be listed on as an option that it might be able to get it from the manufacturers, it doesn't necessarily mean that that option is going to be readily available. When I was buying the Enkei wheels, there was really only 1 offset and 1 wheel width that was readily available. And I do want to keep to readily available components. That gives you a fair chance you're going to be able to find replacements moving further into time. That landed me on a 7-inch wide Enkei rim. Now that's pretty good news when it comes to these Toyo tyres, because they have tyres that are anywhere from 195 millimeters wide on the tread to a 225 mil wide on the tread. If I want to go any wider, I would have to look at maybe putting a 16-inch wheel on, which I wouldn't rule out for the rear end of the car, but I'm going to try and avoid it. All of those tyres will fit on a 7-inch wide rim. I have chosen to go for 195 wides on the front and 205 wides on the rear. Slightly bigger aspect ratio for the tyres at the front, but overall these 2 tyres have about the same diameter. One's just a little bit wider at the rear. Now in this video, I don't think we've got enough time to explain exactly why I want a slightly wider tyre at the rear. That's going to have to follow in future videos on this. But it's not uncommon to run a wider tyre on the rear than you do on the front for a mid-engine car. Even if you look as far back as those Porsches in the 1950s, we saw even a bigger difference than this. And this difference in width almost perfectly matches some of the, I guess, Generation 2 MR2, so the Toyota mid-engine car. Now there is a chance that I haven't gone wide enough on the rear because of how much weight we expect on the rear. I do want to try and keep it roughly the same width front and rear, because under braking we still tend to load up the fronts more than we do in the rear, and that's one of the more critical handling situations for a road going car. But we do have the ability to go to a 225 on the rear on the same rim. Now that's going to mean there's going to be a bit more bulge on the sidewall, and it might mean that we get a little less lateral stiffness in the tyre, but that's going to be a question that I answer during testing, not so much in the selection process. So at this stage, I'm quite happy with this breakdown of having slightly narrower on the front than the rear, slightly different aspect ratio. That's fine, I can live with that. I'll go and test that on the track. Now there's a couple of other little bits of information that we have on a tyre that are required for specification of a tyre. One of those is load rating. Now both the front and rear tyres, they are slightly different, but they have the same load rating, which is 89, which means both of these tyres can handle 580 kilos per tyre. That's pretty much the expected weight of the whole car being able to be run on each of these tyres. That's not going to be a problem. In fact, it could indicate that the tyres are just oversized for the job. Again, we're going to find that out when we go testing. The other thing that goes with the load rating is a speed rating. And this is where these tyres, they're a little bit different. So the front tyres I've selected have a speed rating of V. And that means that they're capable of going up to 240 kilometers an hour. At the rear, the speed rating is W, which means the rear tyres will be able to go up to 270 kilometers an hour. Now that's going to be really good news if I have huge amounts of power and I'm able to spin the wheels at 240 k's an hour, but in reality, it's not going to matter. We saw when we did the aerodynamic analysis of this car with an open cockpit, it's going to be a reasonably high drag vehicle. We're not putting a turbocharger in this car to start with. That means that we are really, really unlikely to have a car that's going to exceed 240 k's an hour anyway. If we take this car out on the track, the top speed on the track is far less than what you can do on a complete speed run, because you've got limits on how long the main straight is. So the car will not exceed 240 k's an hour on a racetrack, even if we did put a turbocharger on and increase our power there. So I think we're pretty safe with a V speed rating on these tyres. Needless to say, the maximum speed limit in West Australia is 110 k's an hour, and I'm designing this car not so I can do really, really high speeds. I want it to be fun as we're going around twisty, winding roads. So no problems with either the load rating on the tyres or the speed rating on the tyres. Now I know for a lot of people watching these videos that the information and the decision-making process I've used to decide these tyres might feel a little bit unsatisfying. Maybe you wanted to see us go through tyre data. I wish. I would have loved to have had that. I would have loved to have had all of that information for all the tyres we're potentially going to run. But I just don't have that luxury. And when we're doing things like building cars, the important thing is the decision. Sometimes we're going to do it with imperfect information, but then what is the process around how we deal with that imperfect information? Now I'm leaving a lot of things to final car testing, and when it comes to the suspension and handling and vehicle dynamics of this car, a lot is going to have to be left to the testing to figure it out. But the bonus is, testing is fun. It's enjoyable. We get to go around and blast this car around a racetrack for a while. We get to, when we have registered the car, we get to drive it around, and every time we're driving, we're testing and developing. I get to look at data. That's going to be good fun. I'm really looking forward to when that moment arrives. So I'm not upset that I didn't have all the information that I'd like to make this decision. But if you strongly disagree with the decision that I've made or the approach, or you think I'm completely wrong when I say that the tyre choice is not the most important choice you're going to make on a road-going sports car, then feel free to comment. I do try to get back to all of the comments. I love reading the feedback. There's probably a whole bunch of tyres that you guys are aware of that I haven't really considered. Now, I'm not going into the tyres that are rejected. There was a short list. There's fairly good products out there from a number of different manufacturers. At the end, I might end up switching to one of those tyres. And it may even just be a preference thing. It might not even be that one tyre has significant performance advantage over another. But I'm pretty happy with what I'm chosen here, and I'm really looking forward to getting this on the track. It's going to be a little bit of time before we get there. We've got a lot more work to do, but I hope you're enjoying the process. If this is your first time watching one of these videos, feel free to subscribe. We've got a lot more coming in the future. It's glad to have you on board. Thanks for your time.